that's good. Good morning and congratulations for choosing the best room to start the day in. We're going to have a little session on Confluence this morning with John. John is a strategy and operations manager at Atlassian in Sydney. He works with the Confluence leadership team on business strategy. He once made his own maple syrup by tapping the sugar maple trees in his backyard, and then he boiled them down what felt like ages, but got some good maple syrup. He's spawning a really awesome limited edition Confluence swag that you'll see this morning. So let's just welcome John to the stage. Thank you very much.
Thanks, MC, and thank you all for choosing this session this morning. I know it's on the early side, and I've seen some faces that I saw on the dance floor last night, so hopefully you're all awake and alive. But let's get into it. I'm John Wetenhall, as MC said, and I'm here to teach you how to become a Confluence Whiz kid. So this is actually my 6th summit working in the Confluence booth, and every year I talk to customers, I hear versions of the same few questions. So what do you think the number one question is that I get every year? And it's not what you're thinking. Where did you get that awesome Confluence Hawaiian shirt? In fact, most people care a lot more about the product. The number one question I usually get is, how do I create those pages? Pages that look like the ones in your videos, in your marketing materials. How do I get this data on the page? What's that macro, etc. I also get a lot of questions about spaces. How should I set them up? Should I choose a new space for my team or my project? Today, I want to give you the tools to answer those questions for yourselves. To begin with, we all need to have a good grounding in the core components of Confluence. Put simply, Confluence is a collection of pages. We've had over 140 million pages created in Confluence instances for everything from common use cases like knowledge bases or projects, to doing financial analysis, moving house, or planning parties. At Atlassian, we like to say it started with a page, because for us, that's when an idea becomes tangible. Now, pages alone are great for sharing information, but what I think makes Confluence so valuable is the organization and structure it brings through spaces. Spaces are containers for all of your pages, and they're usually centered around a team, project, or topic. But they can include combinations of these. We'll talk more about this. So I want each of you to leave here today with confidence that you can use Confluence to provide clarity. That means being able to create and edit pages with the content and structure you need to make your message most effective. It also means knowing how to organize those pages in spaces so they're easy to navigate and find. With these basics, you'll build consensus and make decisions faster. You'll impress your colleagues with beautiful pages that include all the relevant information. So today, I'll cover those 2 topics: how to make beautiful, effective pages, and then how best to organize them using spaces. Now, I want to warn you, it's early. I'm going to cover a lot. There's going to be a lot of screenshots and a lot of detail. But if you miss something, don't worry. This session will be recorded, and I'll have some additional resources for you at the end, so you can dig deeper on some of the topics we talk about. Try to focus on the concepts, and try to glean a few tips that you can go back and implement right away in your Confluence instance. So first, let's talk about how to become a page whiz. You must understand what's possible to create, and then the core ingredients of any page. That gives you the foundation for making an awesome page. Next, there are 3 things I want you to be able to improve on when you go home. First of which is content basics. I also want you to be able to find and use macros to add all kinds of special content to your pages. And then third, I want you to be able to structure your pages with layouts. So with those skills, you'll present your information more effectively. You'll get stuff done faster with less confusion, whether you're working on a project with your team, building a knowledge base, or getting your team organized. So first, what's possible? Let's look at a few examples of awesome pages. Here's a project homepage, which has a nice use of layouts and macros. Here's an example of a planning page our field marketing team used for an event we attended. It's got lots of dynamic content from outside of Confluence. Here's our experience team's guide to planning our annual fiscal year-end party, Big Bash, which features the composition macro from one of our partners. And here's a guide to planning offsite meetings with a good use of color, expand macros, and the all-important status macro. Now, before we get into talking about how to make those pages, I want to talk about Pi. Now, I love making awesome Confluence pages, but my favorite thing to make is Pi. These are actually all pies I've made. I might be crazy, but I think that baking pies is a lot like making Confluence pages. And why is that? Well, first, there's many types. You've got lemon meringue, pecan, strawberry rhubarb. They all taste different, and they look different, just like pages have different purposes and different designs. Now, second, pies and pages are both made up of a few core ingredients, no matter what. Both start with a blank canvas, a crust for a pie, and a blank page in Confluence. Then you add the filling, fruit or nuts for a pie, and content to your page. And finally, you make it look good. You add a lattice to your pie, and layouts and design to your pages. Once you know the core ingredients and the key methods, you can apply them to create any flavor of pie or any type of page that you want. Before we get into those key ingredients, I want to share with you one key tip that any baker or Confluence page maker must know. And this comes from a famous guy, Steve Jobs. He said, "Great artists copy, good artists steal." I think it was actually Picasso that said this first, but the point is that you should take the best bits from other recipes, whether you're baking a pie or making a page, and use those to create something even better. So how does this work in Confluence? Take this page, for example, I showed you earlier. You might be wondering how they got these 3 colored boxes with neat little icons, so you can add them to the next page you're working on. All you have to do to find out is go into edit mode. It's like pulling the covers off a page. You can see the 3 macros that make those colored boxes, and other things you might not have even realized were there, like the table of contents macro, working behind the scenes. So the next time you see a cool page in your instance, hit the edit button and check out what's going on. You won't harm the page. So with that in mind, the first thing we need to do is learn the key ingredients of pages so we can then apply them. They are the editor tools, which you can do a lot with just the basics, macros for adding all types of dynamic content, and layouts, which customize how your page looks. These all add up to create the content and structure of your pages. Let's start with the basic editor tools. This might be a review for some of you, but stick with me as I'll go through it pretty quickly. So I'll start by creating a simple page with some text about how to make delicious pies, my favorite subject, of course. And as you can see here, we've got some different text sizes on the page. Now, the way to make those is using headings. There are no font sizes in Confluence, just headings. You're probably thinking, I've used a word processor before, I know what a heading is. But humor me for a minute, because headings will matter later on. So you can add headings from the toolbar, or by using keyboard shortcuts. Command+3 for an H3, for example. And headings are a great way to show different levels of information and make your page more scannable. They're basic, but important. Next, let's add a table. Click the tables icon in the toolbar to add a table and choose how many rows and columns. Now, once you've added them or clicked into an existing table, the tables toolbar will show up and allow you to add and remove rows and columns and do other things to your table. Now, it's hard to describe how to make a pie crust, so let's add some images to show the steps. You can add images from the plus button, and this is an important button, so keep track of that one. You can also drag and drop or copy and paste images into your page. So now that we've got a table and we've got some great images, we notice that the table is starting to go off screen. So we might want to resize those images. To do so, just click on one and then use either the size picker or the pixel counter to adjust dimensions. You can also add borders, link the image to another page or website, and do more with the Properties button. Now everything fits in our table, but the columns are uneven if you look at the one on the far right. This is because columns in Confluence are responsive. They resize automatically to fit your content. But you can override this and set the width yourself by choosing fixed width columns. To change the size, just drag the column guides to resize, and now you'll see that they're actually uniform width. So your problem is solved. Now pages, unlike Word documents or Google Docs, are alive online, and they get richer as you link them to other related content. In our example, let's say I want to link out to where I got those images. So I might highlight the text, and then insert a link from the plus button. That will give me this dialog, where I can just drop in a web link in this example, or search for other Confluence pages to link to. It's super powerful to be able to connect pages to one another, and we'll talk more about this later. So those are some content basics. With those in mind, let's move on to more advanced content. And in Confluence, that means macros. How many of you have used macros in Confluence? Awesome, a bunch of you. For those of you that haven't, macros are ways to insert dynamic or special content into your page. They come in many forms and allow your pages to really come to life. So let's see how to use them. First, how do you actually get a macro on your page? You can insert a macro by using that same plus button and then choosing from the list or clicking on other macros to open up the macro browser. You can also type a curly brace in the editor to do this without having to leave your keyboard. Next, browse or search among all the options in the macro browser. In this case, we're looking for the table of contents macro, which I've typed in the top right. You can then configure what will actually show up on your page. And this is where headings come back into play. So using heading levels, we can decide what will actually appear in our table of contents. Now, it's a little bit too much, so I want to modify to just do a maximum of heading level 3. And if I do that and we refresh, you can see we've removed some items from the list. Now, once you insert your table of contents, it shows up as a gray box. But when you save your page, you'll see that you have neat little links to all the sections within that page, as determined by your heading levels. This is only one example of a macro that you can put on your page, and we'll cover a bunch more in a moment, but I just wanted to show you how to add them to start with. So once we've got some awesome content, we're done, right? Nope. It's like saying you're done with a pie when all you've added is the filling in the top left. You have to add some structure to bring it all together and make it look good. So as you can see, I've added some more content to our page, and it's gotten kind of long. I've got a lot of bulleted lists, and it's getting pretty vertical. I'd like to spread my information more evenly on the page. We can do this with page layouts. So to add a layout, click the Page Layout button in your top toolbar. That gives you a Layouts toolbar where you can add and remove sections, move them up and down the page, and change the actual layouts. Now I've added a new section to my page and moved the top few lines of text and the macro in there. Each section is outlined with dotted lines. I've chosen the 2/3, 1/3 layout, so now I have space to work with on the right side of my page. And below, all the rest of my content is now inside another section. So I can move my table of contents over there to the right, and when I save the page, you can see the table of contents on the far right, a little more evenly spread out. What you can't see after you've saved the page is the page layouts, but they're still there behind the scenes, and they're how you spread content more horizontally around your pages. So, like any chef does on a good cooking show, I've gone off and done some work while you weren't looking to magically present a finished product, a beautiful page. So as you can see, I've added more layouts to the page and put content in an order and placement that makes sense. All the recipe types are in line, but organized by type, so it makes it easier to browse and find the one you want. Let's look at how we did that. I added a few things to spice up the page. First, a horizontal rule, which provides separation between sections. The panel macro, which puts a nice box around particular pieces of your content. And then more layouts to spread the recipes evenly across the page. Now going into edit mode, we can see how we did that. The horizontal rule is added from the plus menu or by typing 4 dashes straight into the editor. Panel macros, you can add like any other macro and put your content inside it to put a nice box around it. And layouts, again, I've used a number of sections here, and particularly the 3-column layout on the bottom, and then filling recipes is in a section by itself to span the whole page. So that's an example of how we combine these 3 building blocks into one page to make it really come to life. Now, for some of you guys that might have been new, for some it may have been a review, but how's everyone feeling? Are you still awake? How are we doing on the things we wanted to understand? I think I've shown you a bit of what's possible and some of the ingredients of pages, and hopefully you've got down the content basics. You can always learn more about macros and structure a bit of a foundation. But let's run through a few more example pages to really solidify what you can do with macros. So we'll look at 2 types of pages, how-to guides and project pages. First, how-to guides. Here's one a team made for planning offsite meetings. We've got 3 nice sections here, outlined in blue, green, and yellow, used to call out information. Now in edit, we can see that these are 3 macros, the info, tip, and note macro. All they do is put your content in a colored box with an icon to help make it stand out. Very simple, but very effective. Now you can add these from the macro browser. Just search for those names, info, tip, and note, or look in the formatting category. Now scrolling down the page, we see a few links with arrows inviting us to click to expand. When we do, we see that there's actually a bunch of content tucked away in there so it doesn't clutter the page. Now, this is called an expand macro, which is just a simple text box that hides your text or content behind an expander. Again, add this like any other macro, put your content in there. It's very simple, but very useful for including appendices or making a long page a lot easier to scan and then allow people to drill into the content that they want. Now in the same view, we have 3 icons: not started, in progress, and done. These are the status macro. And the text and color and style are all customizable. They're great for labeling statuses, as we've done here, but anytime you need a little colorful label to throw up on something, they're really useful. I find they pair very well with tables. This page also uses page layouts to keep things organized and make use of the whole page. We've got a full section on the top and a 2-column layout on the bottom. So that page had pretty much all the information you needed on that page. But what about when you want to build a whole knowledge base with lots of topics and link it all together? Here's an example from our IX team, or a tech writing team. It's neatly organized with a list of pages by topic. Now, each of these lists is actually a macro that's pulling in content from all over Confluence and arranging it by topic. They didn't manually paste each of these links in. So how did they do it? They used the content by label macro. Now you can see all the content by label macros here. There's no links. And when you edit one of those, you can see which labels are selected and all of your options for how you want your list to appear, sorting by title, how many pages, etc. Now you can add labels to any page, which then allows you to use this macro to display those pages elsewhere. Here's one of the pages from that list. And you can see at the bottom the label ix-how-to. Just hit the little pencil icon at the bottom of any page to add a label. Going back into our actual macro editor, you now see the connection with that label. It's what gets the content to show up, along with a few other labels to generate that list. So you can do a ton more with labels. It's definitely one to look more into on our documentation. We'll have some resources about that. And again, that is the content by label macro. Now let's look at a project's example next. Our project homepage has a bunch of important information designed to give anyone, whether a team member, an executive sponsor, or any curious person, a quick overview of the details of a project. People always want to know about the roadmap, and the roadmap macro is a great way to communicate that. You can add it like any other macro, and from there, all it takes is a few clicks to add more bars, markers, or change the timescale. You can even link bars to pages for more information about that phase of the project, for example. This is great for giving people a high-level view and then allowing them to dive into the details. Now, scrolling further down the page, we see a list of Jira issues and then a chart showing issue resolution. This is another great example of showing some top-level detail and then allowing people to dig in further. Both the list and the chart will update dynamically as things change related to your issues in Jira. Now, adding these macros is like adding any other macro, and we'll start with the Jira Issues macro. You must make sure your Jira instance is connected to your Confluence instance to be able to query Jira. Now, editing a Jira Issues macro requires you to use some JQL, Jira Query Language. As this is a Confluence presentation, I'm a Confluence guy. I'm not going to teach you how to do that, but there's plenty of resources online that detail it. You can also copy a save search from Jira. So once you have your issues, select which fields you want to show up on your page. Now, the Jira Charts macro is pretty similar. You can choose between pie charts, created versus resolved, and two-dimensional, which is more like a table. Again, you have to write some JQL to bring up your list of issues. And then from there, you have display options. In this case, I've chosen to chart by status. Both of these macros are a little bit more advanced, but they're super useful if you're heavy users of Jira, and in particular for people that don't want to get into the technical details of Jira, but want a high-level overview of how a project is going. Now, finally, I want to talk about goals. Goals are super important, and we always want to remind our teams of what's important to be working on. So I want to make that easy for them by including the project goals on any other page using an excerpt. You can add the excerpt macro to your page and put the content you want to appear elsewhere inside of it. So now, let's say we're doing sprint planning. We can add those goals in to remind our team. Just add the excerpt include macro, which here I've done by typing a curly brace in the editor and then searching for the macro. And you can add it quickly from the editor. From there, choose the original page, the demo project home, as the excerpt to insert. And then your content will appear on the page. You can reuse that multiple times all over your space. So I know that was fast and there was lots of little detail, but again, the presentation will be recorded. This is a list of all the macros we just covered. So I would invite you to go have a search, have a play around with those, and try adding them to your pages. Now I want to talk about one more thing before we move on to spaces. My final tip around pages is that you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. You can do this with the help of templates. Templates are great because they save you time, they help your colleagues learn how to make awesome pages, and they help standardize the look and feel of your content across your space. Templates for any given space show up in the Create menu. Some, like decisions and file lists, ship with Confluence, but you can also make your own. Just hit the link on the Create dialog, and it'll land you in the Content Tools section of Space Tools, where you can add a new template. Just hit the button in the top right to do so, and then it'll land you in the editor. Now, it's exactly like creating a page with just one difference, and that is the ability to create instructional text and add variables to your page. This is just placeholder text that instructs people what belongs there. Simple text, an app mention, a Jira issue, etc. It guides them to creating a page. Now, once you've got a page you really like, and you want to keep creating it, or you want your colleagues to create it, try making a template out of it. When you're done, it'll show up as an option in the Create dialog. So now I think we've covered it all. Plus, we've added one more thing you can do, which is creating templates. I'd love to see examples of all of your awesome pages, so come by the Confluence booth and tell us about them, or tweet them to us at Confluence on Twitter. Now, pages are the core component of Confluence, but I believe that what really makes Confluence useful is how you can organize and group your pages together. And Confluence does that using spaces. I want to answer that second question about how best to set up your spaces for success. So just as we did with pages, there's a few things we want to understand. Like, why should we even care about organizing pages? And second, what are the tools we use to organize them? With that in mind, I'll show you how to sketch your space organization and page trees, and then a few ways to get your existing spaces under control or set up your next space for success. So, let's start with the age-old question. What are spaces for? When should I create a new one? I find they're for three things broadly: projects, docs, and teams. You can make some substitutions here. Projects might be clients, docs might be more specifically a knowledge base or reference documentation. And teams can be your single team or a whole department. What I also find is that teams, or often departments, are the best way to organize your spaces, because most teams have projects, but they also have a need for documentation. Plus, teams usually outlast projects, and you want to learn from past work, so it makes sense to have continuity, which also means you're not creating new spaces all the time, saving you work. Now, the real answer is that you should make your spaces whatever makes the most sense for your organization. I know that's a bit of a cop-out answer, but it's true, and it should become more clear as we get into how to organize a space. So let's look at a bad example of space structure. This is from one of our internal instances, and this is why you want to start with an organized page tree. I just scrolled for 10,000 pixels, which is the maximum Keynote will let me, and I've only made it to H. So yeah, this page tree goes on forever. Think anyone can actually find anything in there? No chance. Now here are some good examples. Here's one from our templates site, which has the new look for Confluence. And here's our Bitbucket team space on our internal instance. This is in the previous design for all of you server customers out there. You can see how well organized their page tree is. They have neat collector pages for each of the key categories that this team needs. So here's why space organization matters. First, it's easier for you and your team to find your pages when they're organized. And this is because organization puts every page in context. It shows you if it's part of a project and all the other pages related to that project. Not only helps you find a page without having to remember the name, but it also makes sure you're on the right one. It also makes your space easy for those outside of your team to understand. Anyone can show up with a faint idea of the project or topic, and then find the content they need. This will save you time from explaining or responding to pings from other people just trying to find a page. So what does it take to get there? It helps to start with the components of space structure. Remember, a space is a container for pages. It can just be a bucket that you dump everything in, like that first space I showed you, but it can also be an organized, structured collection. And it begins with the page tree. The page tree provides the backbone for your space. It's a list of pages, but the order can be changed, and it has depth. And that depth comes from parent-child relationships. You click on the arrow to expand a parent page and see its children, its subpages. This is the key tool for collecting and organizing pages within your space. Finally, space shortcuts allow you to provide easy access to important pages from your space sidebar. So let's look at an example of a knowledge-based space. This is a space where our people team organizes all the HR policies and documentation for Atlassian. You'll see that they have key topics in their page tree as collector pages, like global benefits and perks, for example. So let's click into that page. Now you can see that below the global benefits and perks page, you have pages for each of our geographies: Australia, the Netherlands, UK, etc. And they've complemented their page tree structure with navigation on the page itself. So you can click these links within the page to get to that specific office, which mirrors and reinforces the structure they have in the page tree. Now finally, they've removed shortcuts, because those aren't really relevant for this space. There's no link to meeting notes or retrospectives because people aren't coming for those. Let's look at a project space. Here's one example of a team's project space. They run many projects out of this one space, which is a question I get a lot. And how do they do that? First, this is the Jira Cloud Platform space, and they have collector pages for each project: Compass, Donut World, Bento, and KitKat. Second, they have multiple levels of parent and child pages. So within a project, it still stays organized and uncluttered. And third, they use names to indicate where you are in the space. So they add the name Bento to a page name, so you know it's Bento design and not Donut World design. It's not wildly different from the techniques used in a knowledge-based space, but it is worth thinking about a few small differences. Now, the final piece I want to cover is register pages. Some of these ship automatically with Confluence, like meeting notes and retrospectives, but you can also create your own. And we'll get back into some macros here. So the example I'll use is a decision register, which is a summary of all your decision pages in a space. Here's one example, and as you can see, it's a brief summary. What's the underlying question, the status, who's involved, the outcome, a due date, etc. Now, this ships with Confluence out of the box. Anytime you make a decision page, it will automatically show up here. But I can show you how to create it. And it requires two macros: the page properties and the page properties report macro. So to begin with, here's one of our decision pages. We want to get the information at the top of the table to appear on our register. And to do that, we put it all inside a page properties macro. It doesn't change anything on the page, and you can't even see it outside of edit mode. The final piece is to add a label, so we can reference it in the page properties report. So we've added decisions. Now, going back to our decision log, you can see the page properties report macro on the page. Again, you can see why labels matter. You have to specify the label, decisions in this case, and which space you want to draw from. Finally, expanding the options, you can see the ways you can customize that list, which columns to show, how many items. There's lots you can do to customize. Try making your own register using a page properties report. If you get stuck, look at the decisions, meeting notes, or retrospectives logs in your instance. OK, so now you know what the basic building blocks are. How do you apply it to your Confluence spaces? Whether you're starting fresh or working with existing spaces, I encourage you to sketch it out. Think about all the content you might create for a given project. How do you want to organize it? And what other projects might you run? You don't have to be exhaustive and list every page, but doing a solid brainstorm is worth it. Now, you might want to map each project to its own space. Or you might want to group multiple projects in a space, like the Bento example I showed earlier. I find that one team or one department can actually put multiple projects in a space and then have common registers for things like requirements, meetings, and decisions, as we've done here. If you make your organization too granular, i.e. a new space for each project, then work gets fragmented and harder to find. Keeping consistency from one project to the next in one space helps people reference their past work and learn from it, which is why I like this model. Similarly, if you're making a knowledge base, you can start to list what articles you might write, or the pages your team might need to draft those articles, and then other sections you're going to want to include in your knowledge base. Groupings will start to come together, and you should think about how you would use parent pages to organize your content within the space, and then the child pages that appear beneath them. So think about this and try actually getting out a pen and paper and sketching your spaces. A little bit of planning up front can go a long way towards having an organized space that is easy to navigate. So to do that, start by creating collector parent pages for each project or topic. I like to use the children display macro, which displays the child pages of each parent so that someone can come to that page, get some context, and then choose which page. Or they can use the page tree on the side. Again, the structure is reinforced. Now, staying organized means creating or moving pages to the right place. When creating a new page, Confluence always shows you what the parent page is. When you hit create, it automatically creates the new page as a child of the page you were on. And it shows you in the create dialog here what that is. You can also always see where the page is in the page hierarchy with what we call the breadcrumbs at the top of the page. To move a page, you can hit the page tree button next to the breadcrumbs. You'll get this screen from which you can set the page location. Just type in your new parent page or even a new space, hit move, and you're done. So at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter where you create a page to begin with, as long as you move it to the right place. Lots of people like to create pages in their personal space and then move them later on once they're ready for the public eye. Now, that's not the only way to move pages. You can also move them within the page tree to reorganize on a greater scale. To do this, just hit the Reorder Pages button at the top of your Pages view. You can also get to this via Space Tools and Content Tools in the older design. Then, you just drag and drop pages around to your desired locations. Now, I was going to screenshot this, but it's pretty basic, so I think you'll all be able to do it. It's a great way to clean up your page tree if it's gotten out of control. Now, remember why space organization matters as you're going through these exercises and improving your space. You want it to be easy to find pages. They should get added value from being placed in context, which in turn makes it easy for someone outside of your team who's unfamiliar with your space to find the content they need. Now, you should all know after today why organization matters and the key building blocks of space organization. The page tree, which is made up of parent and child pages. Now, try going back to your Confluence instance and sketching your space organization. Does it make sense? Could it be improved? If so, use the techniques we went through. Create collector pages using the children display macro, and then reorder pages within your page tree as necessary. Try making your own register pages using labels and page properties report macros, and your space will be under control in no time. Now, I want to leave you with a final point. This image is my dad's analysis of all the ingredients of pumpkin pie recipes. Yeah. Distilling it down, there are some ingredients that every pumpkin pie, or every pie for that matter, needs. But it also shows you that there's lots of room to experiment with different combinations. The same is true for pages. You all know the basic ingredients, and you know much of what's possible. So I want you all to go out and put those ingredients, content, macros, and layouts, together in all kinds of ways. And you'll create pages that get your point across and impress your colleagues. Now, finally, I know we covered a lot today, and some of it was detailed and quick. I put together a little page for you on a public Confluence instance, where it has some of the demo content I showed today, as well as a list of the macros we covered, links to helpful docs and articles, and eventually, once we get the video and the recording of this talk, I'll put it on there as well. So definitely go check out that page, and stay tuned for the talk once it's recorded. Thanks so much for coming out this morning and staying awake with me. Let me know what you thought on Twitter, and hopefully I'll see you at the Confluence booth this afternoon. Thanks again.